Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, one of my favorite off-season episodes to do, period. But for this LSU program, a really exciting conversation, and that is predicting this LSU depth chart coming out of spring practice, coming out of the spring portal window. Now, we saw LSU add two, in my opinion, legitimate difference makers in the spring transfer portal window at positions that were of concern for LSU going into 2025. But I think just that this conversation gets even a little bit more fun, you might say, because LSU had a lot of movement in spring practice as well. There was a decent amount of production that LSU had to replace, specifically on the offensive line. Well, we kind of got some intel. We kind of figured out, who the guys are going to be going into 2025. Now, I kind of want to do my 30-second elevator pitch before we get into the nitty-gritty conversation of how this depth chart looks, and that is look across the college football landscape, but more specifically, look across the SEC landscape. How many teams do you trust more than LSU going into 2025? I mean, I think it starts at the quarterback position where you have a guy in Garrett Nussmeier who, number one, you're starting to see some of these early 2026 NFL mock drafts, and you're seeing Garrett Nussmeier. I mean, top five. I've seen a couple where they have Garrett Nussmeier coming one off the board, the number one overall draft pick in 2026. What I mean to say here is Garrett Nussmeier, I think, is one of the more trustworthy quarterbacks in this conference. Like we got a lot of good quarterbacks, especially young quarterbacks. DJ Lagway, Lenore Sellers, Arch Manning at Texas. Garrett Nussmeier might be the quarterback that you trust the most, but in the same token, like we're seeing NFL evaluators think Garrett Nussmeier might be one of the most talented quarterbacks in the country as well. So you have a quarterback that has big time upside, but a quarterback that you trust a lot heading into 2025. And then you go out and say, this LSU team was solid in 2024. Maybe to some LSU fans, maybe a little bit underwhelming. I don't know if that's the case because you go back and look at that depth chart, that roster last year, there were some real deficiencies, specifically on the defensive side of the football. But LSU was still a pretty dang solid football team in 2024. Well, here's the thing. Yes, they lose a couple of really good offensive linemen. That seems like all the national media wants to talk about. I look at this LSU team and say they got better at almost every position on the football field going into 2025. So you had a solid team in 2024 that gets better at the positions they needed to get better at heading into 2025, plus a quarterback that has big time upside, but also a quarterback you trust a lot going into 2025. Like to me, that's the recipe. And I know that was a little bit longer than 30 seconds. I look at this LSU team and I think it's college football playoffs or bust. And I might even take it a little bit of a step further and say I think this team should be dangerous in the college football playoffs in the 2025 year based on the roster that we're about to look at over the next 10 to 15 minutes. Now, I want to get into some of the nitty-gritty conversations. Before we get into it, as always, to the LSU fans, y'all let it fly in the comment section. One of my favorite parts about doing this in May is the LSU fans who are listening to a depth chart prediction episode in May. Like, chances are y'all follow this program pretty dang closely. Y'all give me a ton of insight in the comment section in terms of your thoughts and opinions. Let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, I kind of gave my Garrett Nussmeier pitch, if you will, and I think, again, what excites me about Garrett Nussmeier is two things. One, I think him as a quarterback has some things that he can clean up going into 2025. I think Garrett Nussmeier would probably admit that too, which is good. You want some more upside that can be reached. I think the second question that excites me about this LSU offense is, hey, can we run the football better in 2025? And that was one of the more intriguing storylines coming out of spring, where you go back to that LSU offense in 2024. It was a very good offensive line, obviously headlined by Will Campbell. Never felt like they got the run game going enough to what I saw on paper. I think a big part of Garrett Nussmeier taking a step in 2025 is if this LSU offense in general can run the football more effectively in the 2025 year, one of the things you heard coming out of spring is that, yeah, the offensive line's got a lot of new faces on this unit, but they ran the football well in spring. Can that translate to the 2025 year? You're going to see Garrett Nussmeier take a step if that happens. Caden Durham at running back coming back for year two. He's a dog. I think there's a very good chance he's one of the best backs in the SEC. And I think the interesting conversation is, sounds like Harlan Berry is going to play. Now, I've been a big Caleb Jackson fan, and it was a very underwhelming 2024 year from him. Like, from a Caleb Jackson standpoint, you better put it together, figure it out in 2025, or Harlan Berry's coming, because he's a guy that's going to be difficult to keep off the football field with his difference making ability in space with the speed that he has. Then in the wide receiver room, I look at it and say you probably got a 5-man rotation in terms of wide receivers that I think are going to be difference makers for LSU. Chris Hilton Jr., Barian Brown, Aaron Anderson. That's probably my prediction of what the starting 3 pass catchers are going to be week 1. You also have Nick Anderson coming off the injury. I think a healthy Nick Anderson provides a vertical threat to this offense that I think LSU wants. I think that's the reason they got Nick Anderson. And then you have a guy in Xavier Thomas who can play. Those are the 5 wide receivers that I think play a lot for LSU. And I think what intrigues me the most about this wide receiver room in general is it's multidimensional. You have guys like Chris Hilton Jr., Nick Anderson, who are your bigger body dudes that want to work vertically down the field. You have your speedsters. You have your guys that can make plays in space, Barian Brown, Aaron Anderson, Xavier Thomas. You got a lot of different skill sets for Joe Sloan to kind of utilize in 2025. That's important. I think sometimes we just look at the raw talent in a wide receiver room. I want my wide receiver rooms like a basketball team. Guys that can do different things and we can use in different ways. I don't want all my wide receivers looking the same and doing the same things. LSU's got talent in the wide receiver room, but they also got guys that can do different things. Tight end position, I think this is one of those examples where I don't think it matters who quote unquote starts. I think Bauer Sharp will be your starting tight end because I think he's a little bit more of a complete tight end as we sit right now. Trey'Dez Green probably has the bigger impact on this LSU offense in general. He's going to be a weapon, especially in the red zone. You got 2 tight ends that you like a lot that bring different skill sets. The offensive line, this is the talk of LSU's offseason. I think it's like, hey, how good is LSU going to be in 2025? Tell me how good the offensive line is going to be. No, I look at it and say the interior offensive line to me, I think should be solid. I think should be really solid, actually. My hot take is that Braylon Moore is going to start at center. And I know it sounded like DJ Chester probably beat Braylon Moore out in spring practice for that starting center spot. That might be the case. The good thing with DJ Chester is you can play him at guard. And so if you think Braylon Moore is one of your best 5 offensive linemen, you can kick DJ Chester to guard, put Braylon Moore at the center spot. Look, we've seen a lot of really good football from Braylon Moore. I think you added him in the winter portal window to get him on the football field. Heck, you added him so you could kick DJ Chester to guard. I think that's probably going to be your starting interior offensive line. Braylon Moore at center, Josh Thompson, DJ Chester at guard. You got some young guys, specifically Cohen Eccles, that I think can play, whether it's at guard, whether it's at center. I think that the tackle position is probably the more intriguing conversation to have. And I think what fires me up about the tackle position is it sounds like Tyree Adams and Weston Davis clearly won the jobs coming out of spring. That's important because you look at it. If we didn't know who the starting tackles were going to be going into fall camp, I would be concerned because that tells me they didn't find a guy they like to start. I think the thing that the biggest takeaway, you might say, in terms of what I learned from this LSU team in spring practice, there's a lot of confidence with Tyree Adams and Weston Davis as your bookend tackles in 2025. Now, are they going to be as good as Emory and Will Campbell were? That's probably to be determined. I don't think the drop-off is – let's just be frank about it. They're probably not going to be as good of a tackle duo as what you saw from Emory and Will Campbell. I don't think the drop-off is going to be as extreme as some of us were fearing in the winter months. That's what should excite LSU fans. Y'all know my take on this LSU offensive line. They've recruited the position very well. They've supplemented it with veteran transfer portal additions, but I think most importantly, they've developed this position very well too. When you recruit well and then you develop well, even when you lose guys that are high NFL draft picks like LSU is losing, you're probably going to be okay because you recruit and you develop your talent well. We might not know a ton about Weston Davis and Tyree Adams, but you kind of have that blind trust that, hey, both of these guys we know coming out of high school, physically capable of playing very good football in the SEC. Then you have that blind trust that they've developed offensive linemen at a very high clip. I don't think the offensive line is going to be as big of a problem as I think some people in the national media might think. And then the other question is, can we run the football better with this unit on the offensive line than we did last year? It's a really good pass protection unit last year. I didn't break in any news. Can we run the football better? I think there's a lot of confidence in what this LSU offense can be. And then the story here is this LSU defense that was sneaky, not a bad defense last year with Coach Baker coming in. And I'll say this, they didn't have the talent. Like you look at the red names that LSU added, transfer portal additions, every single one of these guys that are listed in the, I believe in the two deep right now, were guys that were ranked as 4-star prospects in the transfer portal. And when you're ranked that 4-star prospect in the portal, that signifies we think you're an NFL dude. That's not me sitting in my basement saying that. That's the quote unquote experts. You know, like guys on 324/7 Sports telling us these guys are NFL caliber guys. I would probably agree with a lot of these evaluations. Defensive line. The biggest storyline I think for LSU coming out of spring is, hey, we love what we have in the edge room. Patrick Payton, Jack Piber, and Jamari Butler, Gabriel Relaford. Those four guys, I think you trust a lot to be game wreckers for LSU, which is a big storyline because one of the things LSU did very well on defense last year was get after the passer, specifically out there on the edge. With Savion Jones took a massive step in the right direction. We kind of knew what Swinson was. Interior defensive line, to me, the Bernard Gooden addition was huge because what you were concerned about for LSU prior to Bernard Gooden getting added to this roster was, are we deep enough and do we have any difference makers? I think Bernard Gooden certainly helps with the depth. I think he's a difference maker. You know, there's a lot of LSU fans that I think they think Bernard Gooden's good. I saw Javier Suggs comps to Bernard Gooden. I couldn't disagree more. And that's not a shot at Javier Suggs. Solid football player. That was a depth piece for LSU. Bernard Gooden is significantly better than what Javier Suggs gave to LSU in 2024. Elite pass rusher. Again, the question is, can he jump up from the G5 level at USF and play in the SEC? Go look at the film from them playing Alabama last year, USF that is. Go look at the film of Bernard Gooden playing the Miami Hurricanes last year. He will not have any problem dealing with, I think, SEC caliber offensive linemen because we saw last year Miami had a very good offensive line last year. Bernard Gooden can play against that level of competition. But the thing that fires me up the most is we have some pass rush ability from the middle of that defensive line as well, because that was kind of lacking last year. A lot of that production came from the edge. We didn't really have a guy that was being disruptive in the middle of the defensive line. Bernard Gooden, 27 quarterback hurries last year, super disruptive as a pass rusher on the inside of that defensive line. Linebacker room, y'all know how I feel about it. And I think Whit Weeks, he might be the best off-ball linebacker that we see in the country. I mean, I know you have a couple of guys, Anthony Hill from Texas, very good football player. Maybe he's a little better. Whit Weeks is in that conversation in terms of what he did. And I think the LSU fans know that. I don't think many of the people in the national media do. And then the big story is the secondary. The secondary is night and day better at both positions, right? AJ Halsey, Tamarcus Cooley coming in at safety. That was probably the worst position LSU had on defense last year, were their safeties. Upgrades at both spots, insignificant upgrades at that. Mansour Delane, Ashton Stamps, Jakeem Jackson, DJ Pickett. Not only is this LSU cornerback room, and PJ Wood, I'll throw PJ Woodland in there too. Not only are they more talented than they were last year, They're deeper than they were last year too. The depth was bad for LSU. There were times in the 2024 season where we just had to play guys out of position because we didn't have enough good football players. Not only are you more talented, you feel better about your two deep, but you're deeper. And so when you do have some injuries or when you do have to move some guys around in the secondary, we don't have to play Javion Toviano at boundary cornerback when he's clearly not suited to play that position in the SEC. There's just not many teams in the country, I think, that have as complete of a depth chart as LSU does. Like, there's just not many glaring holes. And I would also add they have significant NFL upside. I mean, you talk about a guy like Whit Weeks, you talk about a guy like Harold Perkins, you talk about the guys on the defensive line. These guys will be selected in the NFL draft in 12 months. So you're complete. You have that NFL upside. Those are the boxes you want to see checked for teams that can win national championships. And I think LSU has put themselves in a spot where they're probably not my pick to win a national championship, but they've put themselves in a spot where they can go compete at the highest level of the sport. That's all you can ask for as you're sitting here in May. We'll sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. LSU fans, let it fly in the comment section in terms of some mistakes that I've made in the depth chart, guys you would have starting or in the two deep. Appreciate y'all. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.